Hey, Chantilly, can y'all send your emails on the chat so that I can start a chain?
Yeah, for sure.
I've sent out the email chain.
All right, cool. As soon as we get it, like y'all can read case, y'all can read constructive.
Has everybody got the email? Because I know I got it.
Yeah, I got it too.
Okay. Is everybody good then to start?
I need a couple of seconds. Who's affirming?
Marist.
Marist.
Speaking first?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there something in the email chain that I should be looking at, or is it just a blank email
No,
chain?
it's just blank.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, if everybody's ready, then I'm good to begin. I'll start time my first word. We affirm our sole contention is the war on drugs. The starting point for legalization requires denormalizing our discourse. Ford argues in 2014, discourse on the drug wars is incomplete without addressing the societal ramifications of imprisoning Americans by the millions. A crucial first step is to denormalize the current system. Denormalizing the system requires shattering the status quo. Nunn concludes in 2002, to drain the pool of surplus criminality, American culture has to be reshaped. When the criminal justice foundation of racial prejudice is shattered, the entire racist edifice will fall. Thus, we advocate an injection of anti-racist discourse into the debate space through the legalization of all illicit drugs. Ozurtag argues in 2011, anti-racism begins with the dismantling of racism's structural manifestations. Decriminalization of cannabis is a crucial tool in perpetuating the racially slanted war on drugs. Anti-racism must be part of the resistant discourse. We can take a tangible step towards ending the drug war by seeking high visibility outlets for challenging positions of institutions. We educate future police, policymakers, lawyers, judges, and prison guards. Anti-racist movements against the drug war should be no different. Grassroots struggle in communities to confront directly white supremacy, and only this targeted universalist approach can solve. Shlisky argues in 2017, rhetoric that incorporates how race situate within marijuana policy can enable more inclusive dialogue and policymaking and legalization. Rhetoric advocates to remedy past wrongs. Targeting within universalism combines a call for the universal common good with attention to the particular experiences of members of different racial groups. This framing enfolds the particular effects of prohibition within a universal story. By addressing legalization, jurisdictions that may have more political will to advance the dignity of people. We isolate two advantages to our methods. Step 1A is ending the whitewashing. Status quo decriminalization whitewashes the narrative. Shlisky argues white individualism remains an important and politically expedient aspect of marijuana politics. That's why without full legalization, drug politics will prop up new vehicles of white supremacy. Franklin argues in 2014, legalization is the most effective thing we can do. Unlike decriminalization, the new law means there will be no more arrest for mere possession. In states with decriminalization, cops still arrest users with small amounts of marijuana due to technicalities. Thus, this whitewashing makes people feel good about racial justice, but really insulates more racism. As Shlisky concludes, characterizing legalization in terms of white individualism reinforces the deeply racialized history of marijuana prohibition. Thus, whitewashing insulates racial mis and inequities perpetuated through the war on drugs. Legalization should address past harms because marijuana prohibition was created and enforced in an unjust, racially biased fashion. Subpoint B is countering white hegemony. Now, it explains crime provides hegemonic services for the state. Form explains in 2020 draconian law enforcement measures cannot be overstated. The war on drugs is operating more effectively as a system of racial control. It was designed to do just that. Quinton finds in 2020 strict drug laws encourage police officers to search for drugs. That increased the odds of encounters escalating, turning violent. Advocates who want to legalize have argued that drug policy would reduce unnecessary confrontations between police and minority residents, which Clinton quantifies a black person in America is roughly 3 times more likely than a white person to be killed by police. And until it's removed, it remains a tool to mobilize and strengthen white supremacy. Nunn explains, given the importance of crime to the maintenance of hegemony, criminal justice apparatus is dependent on being perceived as a necessary to control others. The recurrent war on drugs, an example of the process of conscious creation and manipulation practiced by the state. The threat of drugs can always be used to mobilize and strengthen society. Thus, the tangible action of voting affirmative and systemic control, as Clark finds, by choosing to recognize whiteness in a space where race is not to be performed and using the proportionality to educate other white people about racial justice, while amplifying the historically marginalized voices of black individuals within the movement. Participants demonstrate digital allyship that seeks racial equality and justice rather than dominance. Thus, you should affirm.
Y'all, do you want to send a speech doc for that?
Yeah, I'll send it right now.
Cool. We'll send the neg, and then let me download it real quick.
Let me know when you,
Yeah, let me know when y'all get it too, so we can reconstruct it.
Okay, I just sent it. Let me know once both of you have received it.
All right. Yeah, I got it. Or no, wait. Yeah, I got it. Cos, did you get it? All right, just if anyone's not ready, let me know now because I'm about it. And judges, it's 2 off, and then we'll respond to their framing later. It's 2 off though. Okay. Again, if anyone's not ready, just okay. First off, interpretation. Debaters must disclose their constructive positions, accept all identity arguments on the open source with highlighting tags in any paraphrase case text on the 2021-2022 NDCA wiki under their name and school at most 30 minutes after the round which they read. Violation, they disclose, but there are no highlights. It's impossible to tell what these cards mean or what warrants their reading from them. We have 3 standards. Number 1 is clash. Plain text disclosure fails. Zao 19 says that reading through massive blocks of text makes it substantially harder for debaters to prepare when there is limited time resource. It's difficult to isolate where a card ends, and more time is actually spent scrolling through than actually reading tags, plain text, and standard text. It makes it significantly harder to isolate crucial portions such as advocacy text. This wiki is meant to facilitate clash through transparency. Debaters should be able to access it and work creatively. A debater should be able to debate a specific affirmative, and they should be able to accessing the evidence if they chooses. This optimizes the ability of the negative and to prepare an in-depth attack on the affirmative, further facilitating the clash that disclosure is meant to create. Second is inclusion. We have 3 subpoints. A is debaters with disabilities. Massive blocks of text can be difficult for people in the debate community with disabilities such as dyslexia. It is not acceptable to have a portion of the debate community be unable to read the disclosure, especially since disclosure is meant to provide equal access to arguments. B is novices. There's no reason to force debaters to jump through extra hoops since the evidence is already out there. It's better to share the resource with everybody. This model would substantially lower the entry barriers since the team without much infrastructure could also rely on a wealth of evidence provided by the wiki. Providing them with easy access to evidence allows them to keep up with the amount of evidence required to be successful on the circuit. C is prep outs. Small schools don't have the scouting or team size to prep out other teams at the tournament. Open sourcing levels of playing field as small schools like Chantilly can now prep out specific answers to the big school highlighting. 3 is evidence ethics. Open source is the only way to verify pre-round that cards aren't miscut or highlighted or unethically, or to make sure we can bypass paywalls. Maintaining ethical evidence practices is key to being good academics, and we should be able to verify that you didn't cheat. Education is a voter. It's the reason we do debate, and inclusion is key to experiencing debate. You should vote on the potential for abuse. If their model of debate has a high potential for abuse in future rounds, you should disincentivize it by voting against it. It's drop the debater. The ballot is the biggest disincentive for bad behavior. Yes, counterinterpretations. Reasonability is arbitrary based on the judge's bright line and encourages intervention. No RVIs. You don't get to win for being fair, and they encourage people to debate theory. Next off is a K. The Academy co-opts any radical movement by keeping it in the books. We argue about what would work, but we never create change. The Academy is a graveyard where social movements go to die, and their AC will face the same fate. The alternative is to inject the app with a radical defeat, one that will make them see that they can never create change in the lens of a debate. This is the only way that we can escape the Academy. Occupied UC Berkeley 09 said that the university steals meaning. The university is a factory of the illusion that meaning and reality can be separated. Perpetuate the inertia of meaning detached from its social context. Research programs co-opt radical potential. We attend lecture after lecture on how discourse produces subject, ignoring the fact that we ourselves are produced by this disclosure, about the disclosure, which leaves us believing that it is only words which matter. Power weaves nets which contain and neutralize all thought and action. The binary revolution inside books and lecture hall. The university is a graveyard of liberal good intentions, of mediocrity, opportunity, equality, and democracy. They are summoned forth and banished by a few well-meaning phrases and research programs, giving their book titles their citations. In this graveyard, our actions will never become the conduits of a movement if we remain permanently barricaded within. For these reasons, we negate. You good?
Okay. Yeah. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let me just start timer. For your K, is it identity specific? Or is it
Yeah,
just general?
No,
Okay.
it's just general.
Wait, so it's just general, correct?
In context of what?
Just argumentation. Is it specific to be run against identity arguments or run against arguments in general?
In general.
Okay, that's fair. Do you have a question?
So on your war on drugs thing, can you just explain how legalizing encourages like ending whitewashing again? I just didn't get that part.
What we're saying is that right now, based on the current precedent of decriminalization, those laws are inherently whitewashing the situation because they only benefit white people, because with decriminalization, there becomes so many new loopholes that are still used to criminalize Black people that it becomes an inherently white narrative.
Okay. You have a
Yep.
question?
Yeah. On your K, the top piece of evidence you use on the Academy is occupied UC Berkeley, correct?
Yeah.
And what was the context when that evidence was written?
I'm sure you know. Do you know?
It was a movement to occupy UC Berkeley, I believe in 2009. I'm just wondering, did that succeed?
I don't know. Can you tell me?
I would say
Did
it
it
did succeed. So if
Did
it
succeed.
if it did succeed, right, and your evidence was pre its success, does your logic still stand?
Yeah, I don't understand why it wouldn't stand.
Well,
Because
it says the
it's an idea. It's not just out there for the succession. It's
but
just an idea. The fact that
if the idea is that academic change never works, then how did it work in that scenario where they wanted something and they protested within the academic
because that's
center
not
and got
what
their
we're
demands
arguing
met?
is in a debate space, not by occupying UC Berkeley. We're arguing that in a debate space, everything that gets nothing that happens in here will eventually go
Mhm.
onto the real world.
Wait.
And so by what?
Okay, that's fair. Do you have a question?
Not really. If you want to have another question, you can.
Was your evidence on your case specific to the debate space or just broader academic discourse?
It applies for both, but we're using in the context of the debate space.
Okay, do you have a question?
I really don't have a question. I mean, if you want to end cross, I'm fine.
No, I can keep
All right,
asking
yeah.
questions.
All right, keep asking. You can ask questions. Happy to answer.
For on your interp, when you say inclusion, when you say debaters with disabilities can't read full cut cards or full text, is that inclusive of all disabilities, or is it just a minor sect? Like, say people who are colorblind and can't read highlighting, which you require.
No, well, we give an example like dyslexia, but we include all disabilities in this context.
Wait, so you include all disabilities by doing something which is prohibitive towards certain disabilities?
No. Why? Well, your example is color.
I gave you an example, but that's time.
Okay.
I think a little bit of prep.
We're going to use prep. I'll let you know how much we use.
All right. It's gonna start on open source and then go to the K. Is anybody not ready? Okay. It'll be kind of fast. Does anyone prefer me to send a speech doc before?
Yes, please send a speech doc if it's gonna
Yeah,
be
yeah. Please send a speech doc.
Okay. And keep in mind there will be analytics. So if you're not listening to the speech, you may miss stuff. All right, it's been sent. When everyone gets it, I'll start. Is anybody not ready? Okay. Starting over first open source is a metaphorical embodiment of the silencing of anti-racist education when they have metaphorically created what none says the state has the power to do, which is when something is hard, the state creates drugs to be a crisis when our half is hard to answer. They read bad theory against it. This discourse is uniquely anti-black and an independent reason to reject them for trying to silence the affirmative. Counter-interpretation. Debaters competing in varsity divisions at TUC but tournaments versus schools all previously read evidence by including a tagful citation of the last three words from the evidence in Keystone 2021, 2022, and ECA Public Forum Wiki on your old school's wiki page immediately after the debate in which it was read. Our counter-interp is better than air interp because it sets a limit on who and where this disclosure is actually needed that secures local debate and protects small schools who do not travel nationally. Any barrier can prevent novices from continuing their model. Disclosure allows you to refer to other wikis, which they literally didn't pre-round. This turns back the long implications of education and debate and research skills. Let's get to their offense. First, they say clash. First of all, we don't link. We don't have a massive blocks of tests with the first three, last three solves. Zeus complaints. But second, the second warrant is that transparency is key. All of our stuff is transparent. We're probably the most transparent team on the circuit. They say debaters with disabilities, but turn, they force debaters with disabilities to read narrative-based positions in schools. We'd say that's bad, and forced outing is something that their intern mandates. And second, they only specify dyslexia as a disability harm. Their mandate of highlighting can harm colorblind students is significantly regressive. Disclosure readme pages can solve this offense. They say novices, that's above, but this is a diss out of them. They say evidence ethics. First of all, who made Chantilly the police of the circuit? Disclosure isn't about policing ethically cut cards. It's about figuring out nuances and arguments to build clash. And second, email chains check a lot about their offense, especially when it's set prior to the speech. They could have also asked for a copy of the position before the round through our contact info on the wiki that says if you have any questions, let us know. Now, let's go to our offense against their interpretation. First is the co-op dissent. Their interpretation encourages the co-op team's evidence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for small schools, but it is
I can't hear anything.
Yeah, same.
my mic turned off. I'm so sorry. Where did I cut out? Where?
I think you
The
just
co-op dissent.
The co-op decided.
Yeah.
That's where I cut out.
just
You
like
got
right
email
when you
chains.
started it.
Okay, cool. Versus the co-op dissent. Their interpretation encourages the co-op team's evidence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for small schools, but it is for resources, and encourages teams to do no original research and robs debaters of vital research and evidence evaluation skills. The best educational models to support this method of replication. As Bruner argues, that repeating the account of fuses on one's awareness. One of the biggest mistakes a teacher can make is to forego repetition. The learning process is one of the slow engagement with ideas. Repetition matters because it deepens the engagement process. If one adopts a student-centered teaching approach, repetition will be a very important tactic to enhance learning. You're going to prefer this over their analytically supported argument. We are using academic literature to support our process before our process over their bad norms. Basically, we need to go through and actually recut a card. It's better for education. The impact is long-term educational skills and depth of evidence clarification. Second is a disrepair dissat. This standard makes wiki pages unusable. Leo argues that some of the teams post full text cards that the wikis fall into disrepair. It's a lot easier for the rest of the community if we don't have to open several Word documents to find a list of arguments they've read throughout the year. Some teams have what looks like every card they've ever read on the wiki in full text with no index. All right. On the Academy K. Ostertag tells you that the anti-racist framing is the best way to create real change. Ostertag evidence implicates a high visibility in spaces like Elam's of a national tournament, grassroots struggle within a larger community go on and affect our own smaller communities that creates policy change against white supremacy. This isn't just discourse for the sake of discourse. The Academy K isn't even applicable if you read Ostertag. And effect is inevitable. In order to challenge it, if we need resistance to be effective, Zembliers argues that effect encompasses and exceeds more than individualized concepts of emotion. Recognizing the effect of the dimension, resistance complements understanding of power. Resistance against neoliberal forms of education involves significant effective repercussions for teachers and students. Neoliberalism itself is an effective event, and they're all fails. Resistance is an effective movement of becoming rather than an individual act with consequences for students and educators' bodies, theory, research, making, practice, and education. The teachers engage in false compliance, agreeing at rhetorical level with some aspects of professional standards while resisting them in practice or denouncing standards in small circles of trusted colleagues. The process of student occupation with the university premises and the visibility gave me transfiguring a moment in the lives of participants and local community. And turn, their discourse is reductive towards our speech art. Semblice argues that what is needed in the study of resistance and critical pedagogy is what Thrift calls a biopolitical approach. It pays attention to the effective consequences of mechanism techniques of neoliberal education in schools and university, also because it evokes affirmative critique, the sort of critical engagement with ideas that creates other effective spaces for alternative counter contact practices against other neoliberal education. Oops. Finish this. Recognizing the resistance is not a set of individualized actions, but rather is very much embedded in the effective structures of neoliberal education. Remember, Ostertag literally says that discourse has real-world effects. It's not just saying discourse for the sake of discourse, making arguments just to say we talked about them. It has real-world implications because it follows us outside of round.
Okay. We'll take. Wait, first, is there anything on the doc you didn't read?
No.
No? Okay, cool. Prep starts now.
Oh, I didn't read. I think I may have accidentally copied in the war on drugs. I obviously didn't read that.
Was there one more card you read, like right at the end after The last highlight on the doc is the effective introduction of neoliberal education, or was I just hearing something wrong?
The last card, the tag is their discourse is reductive towards our speech act.
Yeah, never mind then.
Yeah.
That was 120. It's going to start on disclosure, then just the app.
Starting the counter interp or your interp?
It's starting on our interpretation. It's starting on I guess the counter interp. I'll just go in order of what they read. I'll just go in order of how they read it. Is that cool? All right, cool. Yeah. Extend the interpretation. Debaters must disclose their constructive positions, accept all identity arguments, open source with highlighting tags, and paraphrase case text on the 2021-2022 NDCAPF wiki under their name and school almost 30 minutes before they're on there. Right? They've conceded they violate. They say we're silencing anti-racist demands. Our argument is that you should have read this while open source disclosing. That does not silence your argument because we say you can read it. Our model of data allows you to read this. You just have to open source it. They say counter interpretation that first and last three words, that's fine. They say that local debates shouldn't have to disclose. One, we say you should prefer the spirit of our interpretation over the exact text. Obviously, we didn't limit out specific circuits, but you should assume that obviously we're reading it for TOC level round robins. That's why we're reading at TOC level tournaments. That's why we're reading it at a TOC level tournament. And second of all, even if this is true, it doesn't matter. Obviously, it's good to disclose on the local level as well. If we win disclosure is a good norm, you should encourage it. On Clash, they say that there's no massive blocks of text. It's not responding to warranting the Zhao evidence. The Zhao evidence is just that you don't see the specific warrants that they're cutting with the highlighting, which is why you can extend it. The Zhao evidence says that you have to go to the article and they have to read through massive blocks of text, which makes it impossible to know what warrants they're reading from cards, which makes it impossible to engage. The impact is Clash. They've conceded that's good for education. Then on inclusivity, they read two disads on debaters with disabilities. They say we force debaters with disabilities to disclose to read narratives, but they've conceded our check the email chain. The interpretation specifically says that they need to disclose everything except identity arguments that they read narratives on. Then second, they say that we only specify dyslexia and they say colorblindness. But number one, we read green highlighting, which definitely like colorblind people can still read green highlighting. But also this argument doesn't make a lot of sense. You probably shouldn't vote on it. It's pretty silly. Then on the novices argument, they just say it's an analytic, but they have conceded the Zhao evidence, which says that under-resourced programs, novices from under-resourced programs are able to start up their programs. They have extensive case lists with open-source evidence that allows them to steal cards from the wiki, which is a good thing, because it allows them to start new programs. That they've conceded that inclusion is a gateway issue. No, the benefits of the game don't matter if nobody's accessing it in the first place, meaning they have conceded the standard. It's basically game over. And then also extend prep outs. Our argument is that small schools like Chantilly can prep out specific answers to the highlighting that big schools like Marist talk about if we have access to open source arguments. I don't think they've made an argument on this. That's pretty clean. Then on the specific disads, they read the first argument is about the co-op disad, but their Bruner evidence isn't in the context of debate. Our argument is that in the context of debate, it's a good thing, sure, that to steal evidence because thinking on your feet is non-unique. You still have to think on your feet in the back half, but specifically stealing evidence allows people to access the benefits of debate in the first place. Then they say that the disrepair disad, their standard makes wiki pages unusable. It's disproven by number one, the LD and policy, but number two, we say that the fact that we do it and the fact that they prepped us out proves that this probably isn't true. Then extend all the paradigm issues. Number one, theories of prior question. It begs the question of fairness, whether this round was structurally fair for us in the first place to engage with, which means that you should vote after. You should vote after because it's a question of whether you can include people in the debate space, and also it's a question of potential for abuse, even if they win that they haven't abused anybody in this round. Our argument is that our model of debate is good, and they have the potential. Their model has the potential for abuse. on the app. On their argument, that's why discourse is good. 3 reasons it's not. Number one, they shouldn't be able to get the ballot by saying some of their stuff is bad and first constructive, especially if they're arguing that discourse external to the legalization of drugs is good. Expecting everyone to read racism and constructive is ridiculous and kills most of the discourse in the debate, and punishing us for increasing discourse is bad. This causes a chilling effect on actual engagement with the topic issues surrounding the war on drugs and force theoretical responses instead, which is a bad model of discourse and means they always win regardless of what we do, which is unfair. Drop them for forcing a bad model in this round and just had a norm in future rounds. Second, no warrant is why this discourse on the war on drugs is better than discourse on any other issues with structural harms. The U.S. commits war crimes in Yemen. Black Lives Matter is a good movement to structural reform. Police brutality unfairly targets minorities. Uyghurs from China are oppressed. Afghanistan is going to shit. Human rights abuses in Myanmar and Kosovo. Now we've advocated for a bunch of structural issues, which is a double bind. Either A, you buy the non-topical mentions of issues function as pre-filled offense and vote me up on scope because I talk about the war on drugs and other issues, and their framing don't apply. Or B, you drop them because they create counterproductive races to the bottom of commodification and less clash with succeed actual discourse.
Maybe my timer's broken, but I have everything after expecting people to read racism and constructive is bad as way over time. It was like 4:30.
Wait, I wasn't looking at my timer. That's my
Yeah,
bad.
it was 4:30.
What was overtime?
Everything after expecting people to read racism and constructive is bad and regressive.
Okay, we can drop the last argument about like when I read a bunch of things that I said discourse on is good. We can drop that part.
I just have whatever was flowed in time. So if that works, then that works.
Cool.
Are you good for cross?
Yeah, I'm good for cross.
Okay. When in our AF do we ever say that if you don't read something about race and constructive that you lose?
Well, you do say that your discourse about racism is good, and you should
Yeah.
vote AF on that discourse. We say punishing us for not reading discourse about racism is a bad model of debate because it kills engagement with
so that's not what you said. You said about reading and constructive. At any point in the debate, because our role of the ballot is literally just to inject anti-racism, you could have brought up race arguments. You could have read case turns. You could have done a lot of things to fit within the role of the ballot. It's not abusive. You just didn't do it because we've been running this AF all tournament and people have had adequate responses to fit into the role of the ballot. You can have a question.
Okay, sure. You've read this all tournament. Why is the ballot key in this round? You've already won. Either A, it doesn't solve, or B, it is solving and it's not unique.
Yeah, the ballot is key, first of all, because we isolate things like high visibility, like quarters at a national tournament. And there's not like a bright line. Like we say that every time that we inject anti-racism into the debate space, especially in a topic like the war on drugs, which allows us to do that at a lot higher level, that's a good thing. Like good things don't stop being good just because we read it in the last round.
For example, policy debaters read these type of arguments all the time, like chaos as to why.
Sure.
Like,
and I bet no one asked them why because they read it in September. Are they still reading it?
Are there less racial disparities in policy debate as a result of these arguments?
Sure. Maybe. Yes. I'm not in policy and I don't really understand the warrant because we're in public forum.
In LD and policy, they've solved racism in their debate spaces, number one, but number two, broadly in America by having discourse about racism.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were I misunderstood the question. No, look, we're not saying that this is a catch-all, fix-all for all of racism. This is a method argument, which is saying that our method is really good, and that's where we read evidence saying that this method promotes discourse beyond just debate, but it's literally the only thing we carry with us outside of debate. No one here is actually legalizing weed. The only thing we're doing is denormalizing how we talk about legalization, which does have real-world benefits. And I would argue that the reason why
the argument is that it has real world benefits, right?
I would argue that the reason why K debaters are continuing to read these kinds of cases are because they are still relevant, still necessary, and still beneficial. Saying that because racism hasn't been fixed yet is a reason to stop reading these arguments, I think is pretty shitty.
No, we didn't say it's a reason. We just think that means your method has no solvency.
Yeah, that's literally the same thing. Just because solvency hasn't... Because you're saying that because solvency hasn't happened yet, why are you reading this?
Should we not be able to contest that your method solves racism? It's a pretty ridiculous claim to say that reading racism...
The problem is, first of all, that argument wasn't in rebuttal. And second of all, we read actual literature on the effects of discourse. And what's great about it is it's specific to the war on drugs, which is why it's unique. But that's
great.
We're going to take a prep.
Okay, that's all up prep. Is everybody ready? Everybody's good? Okay, I'll start timer first.
Wait, what's the order?
It's just going to be the, I guess, our counter interp, then their interp, very briefly on war on drugs at the end. Okay, is everybody good?
Yeah.
First. Actually, I'm gonna change the order. It's gonna be war on drugs, then hold up. Yeah, war on drugs, then theory. Mainly though on their interp. Okay, I'll start time on my first one. Okay, everybody good? Okay, cool. On the K, they concede the Ozurtic evidence, which tells you anti-racism framing is key, especially in high visibility scenarios. This is important because at the point in which we are in the eliminations of a TOC bid tournament with over 7 people in the round, this is the ultimate high visibility scenario, and this round is going to have real-world impacts. At the point in which they're conceding Ozurtag, that Ozurtag can have real-world influences by influencing the people in the round. The first thing you have to look at is our argument about the war on drugs, and this is fundamentally conceded because every response is over time. We're telling you that the war on drugs, the first thing you must do is denormalize the current criminal justice system because it's always been used to hurt minorities, specifically on our first subpoint A about whitewashing. We tell you that decriminalization, which is happening now, is never going to work because as long as you have decriminalization, you still have loopholes. That's how Franklin evidence. This is really important because if you negate, you allow these loopholes to continue, which allow for the whitewashing of criminal justice reform, meaning that minorities are never going to be helped, which leads to a cycle in which there is never success. But then on our subpoint B, we tell you about countering white hegemony. We tell you that the reason why these drug wars were created was to hurt minorities. That is the purpose, and they suffer as a symbolic structure which is used to withhold minorities, which is why our Quinton evidence is very specific in which it tells you that drug laws have always increased police encounters, which is why Clayton quantifies that blacks are 3 times more likely to be killed by police. This is inherently problematic because if you negate, it is an affirmative sign in which you support the war on drugs by upholding it and cutting down good discourse. This is the most important thing in the round because of our Overtag evidence, which once again tells you that high visibility scenarios are key. On their theory debate, remember what they cold concede at the top. All they try to say is they don't silence, but the problem is they read open source as a way to get out of a structural violence debate and a race debate. Let's look specifically what Claire told you word for word. It says first, open source is the metaphorical embodiment of anti-black education. They have metaphorically created what none says the state has the power to do. When something is hard, the state creates drugs to be a crisis. But now AF is hard to answer. They read bad theory against it. This discourse is uniquely anti-black and an independent reason to reject them for trying to silence the affirmative. This is a line out of the Richard Nixon playbook. They are trying to make sure they do not have to bait out an affirmative because they know that fundamentally they have conceded Ozurtag, which tells you the first thing you have to prioritize is always going to be anti-racist discourse. At the point in which they fundamentally concede that, they try to cop out by saying that theory is a prior question. The problem is that came after our Ozurtag analysis, which is more holistic and looks at it within academic centers. At the point in which we are looking through academic discourse, the first thing you have to do is look to the structure of the integrity of the activity. They themselves tell you that the most important thing is education. Well, education always needs to be prioritized on real world issues. They say they want inclusiveness and they say they want to help people go into debate. The problem is you can never help people go into debate if you are constantly shutting down any form of argument which talks about systemic injustice. That is why Claire's argument in rebuttal is so pressing to the quality of the debate, because we tell you that the first thing that has to come first through our fundamentally conceded Ozurtag evidence is always going to be anti-racist. They say we dropped them for saying that they didn't read in constructive. No, that's not what we say. We just say you have to prioritize anti-racism. It doesn't have to be read in constructive. At the point in which they fundamentally concede that, the only ballot you can sign is the affirmative.
We're gonna take some prep as soon as I get on a call with the class. All right, prep starts now.
That's all our prep.
Yeah. Okay, it will just be the theory shell. All right. They have completely dropped the theory shell. Theory is a prerequisite to all discussion in the debate round. If you believe that there is even a slight risk of abuse based on theory, you should vote for us because they promote an unfair style of debate, which links directly with our point of novices, because novices will feel unsafe if they don't feel like they're being placed in a fair debate space. We were going by bringing up they concede that they violated our interpretation, and they have not made a single piece of defense against why our interpretation. The only thing that they do is bring up a counter interpretation because they are scared of facing our own counter interpretation, our own interpretation, which promotes fairness all throughout. They also concede the Zhao evidence, which says that there is no reason for debaters to jump through extra hoops, which promote because with that emphasis all out there. This can help smaller schools like Chantilly to help go against other schools that are fully prepped out. We know this because the other team prepped out against us, but we were not able to because they didn't disclose properly. So we had inadequate resources, and we were actually gonna follow their framing research, but after they read a framing and we found out that they played unfairly, we had to read theory because we were like, oh, okay, we need to promote better norms for the debate space. So if you believe that there is even a slight risk of abuse, you should vote for us because we set good norms in the debate. Next, and now I want to extend novices. There's no reason to force debaters to jump through extra hoops since the evidence is already out there. It's better to share research with everybody. This model will substantially lower entry barriers because teams without much infrastructure could also rely on a wealth of evidence provided by the wiki. Providing them with easy access to the circuit allows them to keep up with the evidence required to be successful on the circuit. This goes cold conceded, and as I've said multiple times, if you even believe there is a slight risk of abuse, you should vote for us to promote better norms for the debate space. They completely dropped this. Now I'll move on to the K. On their argument that discourse is good, there's one reason that it isn't. They shouldn't be able to get the ballot by saying that some stuff is bad and personally constructive, especially if they're arguing that discourse external to the legalization of drugs is good. Expecting everyone to read racism is constructive is ridiculous, and it kills most of the discourse on this debate. And punishing us for increasing discourse is bad because it causes a chilling effect on actual engagement with the topic of issues surrounding the war on drugs and forces theoretical responses instead, which is a bad model of discourse, and it means that they always win regardless of what we do is unfair. Drop them for forcing a bad model in this round and to set a norm for future rounds that this is a bad method of change. Ultimately, Judge, we're winning a theory show. We're winning the K. They have promoted an unfair space for the debate environment, which means that you automatically default for voting neg. Thus, we negate.
You ready for cross?
Yeah, we're good for cross.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. I just want to clarify, you said you read the open source because of the violation, not because of the contention, correct?
We read it because of the violation.
Yeah.
We read it
I'm
because
just what.
our argument is that your model of disclosure is bad.
Yeah.
It's bad for small schools. You should vote for us to endorse our model of
Sure.
disclosure, which is better for debate, better for small schools.
That's fair. I'm just wondering how many times today have you read open source, just to clarify?
Two times.
Was every team you didn't read it against not?
Yeah, every team we
using
didn't
open
read it
source?
against was fully disclosed.
They
I'm pretty sure.
fairly, yeah.
By your interpretation, every
Yeah, by
single
our
team you
interpretation,
didn't
yeah.
read
Yeah, by our
against was
interpretation.
fully disclosed.
They
Like,
they open source their evidence with highlights. That's our argument.
Because it's a common practice. It's the
That's
fair
a
way to
great-
debate.
Like
That's a
just to
good one.
clarify though, like 100%, they were all.
I'm pretty sure
following the
like every
practices.
team, like
Yeah.
Ransom GM was, Taipei American was, Summit wasn't, but Summit was reading an identity argument which exempts them from it. We read it against what's the team name? Not Miami Beach. We read it again. That was round one, so we can't read it.
Oh,
then.
that was
We read it against Dalton. Yeah, we
Okay,
like.
that's fair. Do you have a question?
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
So your argument is that we're reading frivolous theory. Can you explain how disclosure theory is frivolous?
Yeah, sure. So let's be clear. Can you mute yourself? This is not just disclosure theory, right? Maris reads disclosure theory. We've probably run it like a billion times at this tournament. We say, like, we agree, disclosure is good. The wiki's great. Like, that is a great norm and baseline. When you start adding restriction on top of disclosure, I think that's when it becomes pretty frivolous, especially.
It's not
I'm gonna finish really quick.
Sorry.
I think that especially it becomes frivolous when you're comparing it with the impacts that the discourse of the affirmative could yield in a world we were fully able to discuss it.
Right.
Right. That's when it becomes kind of silly.
But we think that that's not true, because
Oh, I know you
obviously
do.
there's a pretty big difference between like putting up evidence, like the first 3 words and the last 3 words. We can't check your warranting. And also, it makes it so that, like, number one, a lot of your evidence is paywalled. We can't like go and steal your evidence, which
Well, that's
we
new
think is
and
good,
grand.
because-
That argument is
well,
brand
no,
new and grand.
the argument that novices should be able to steal cards and have a wealth of evidence to
Yeah.
start their team with isn't
No,
new.
I understand
That's
your
not-
arguments, but you asked me why I think that open source theory, when we are fully disclosed on the wiki, is frivolous. And I think that it's frivolous because it adds restrictions on top of a baseline, which is just post your shit on the wiki. And also it's being used in this moment to
Well,
silence a
it's-
anti-racist
it's not being-
advocacy that has real world benefits in a world we were able to fully talk about it.
It's
That's why I
not
think it's frivolous.
silencing anti-racist advocacies.
It is.
Because our model of the debate is not that you don't read these advocacies. Our argument is that read them, just disclose them open
Yeah,
source.
but if we
can
have,
engage.
but if we don't meet your arbitrary standard, we don't get to read it. Instead, we have
Why is
to
it
have an open
arbitrary?
source.
Why is it
theory.
arbitrary?
This is the standard.
I've already
It's our model of
explained
debate.
that.
Just
That's
disclose
time.
it and then you can read it.
All right, it's gonna be
Oh,
Yeah.
the AF, and then it's. I'm gonna start an O source really quick, and then it's just gonna be the AF. Open source theory is a metaphorical embodiment of the silence of anti-racist education. They have metaphorically created exactly what none in case says, which is that the state has the power to do. When something is hard, the state creates drugs to be a crisis. When our app is hard to answer, they read bad theory against it. This discourse is uniquely anti-black and an independent reason to reject them for trying to silence the affirmative. This is a gut check. They say yes to reasonability. This is setting bad norms for theory and debate when frivolous forms of disclosure are used to silence these types of arguments, which is why in pre-round they literally said, if you read discourse, we'll read O source. That's just really, really bad for debate. The impact of the discourse gained through the affirmative is dismantling racist structures. That happens by having this debate in the affirmative, not some arbitrary theoretical conversation that happens in a world where weed is legalized. Real stuff happens when we talk about the app. The discourse gained through O source is giving Chantilly a ballot for frivolous theory. Even if you buy both, theory in this case is not a prior question. Weigh the impacts. They are valid. The role of the ballot is to inject the debate space with an anti-racist form of advocacy. This starts with breaking down institutions that exist to create structural barriers. The affirmative has a couple of pieces often to justify this framing. First is that anti-racist framing is the best way to create real change. Our also evidence implicates then high visibility spaces like elims of a national tournament. Grassroots struggles to create a larger community go on and affect our own smaller communities. B, centering the debate around looking within a targeted universalist approach tells us the full story of our drug prohibition. That's really important. That's our Schussel evidence. And third, the ballot is key as is the only tangible item in the debate community to signal allyship for racial equality. This is about the method in which we are talking about it, not just the impact. That's really, really important. When you look at open source theory, the only thing they're saying is that we didn't put full highlighting. We are on the wiki. This is when reasonability steps in. This is when a gut check steps in. If we were able to have the full debate without open source, this would have been a much more educational debate specifically on anti-racist education. So it just comes down to whether or not when a team discloses on the wiki and doesn't put full highlighting, if that negates the benefits of having anti-racist discourse in the context of the round.
It's just the theory shell. Inclusion is a prior question to all of their arguments about racist education. That means a risk of offense on the theory shell wins a threat. That's because inclusion is a gateway issue for small schools to be able to access the debate space in the first place and to be able to build up their programs. That's a Zhao evidence that isn't answered. They're only in their model of debate. Sure, 2 white privileged debaters that go to Marist can read this argument and have great discourse about anti-racism. But our argument is that debaters of color that disproportionately go to small schools cannot access the debate space in the first place because they don't have a wiki that's open source to allow them to access their to start their programs because it allows us to start our programs because the evidence is open source and it allows us to steal that evidence, which the Zhao evidence substantiates. At that point, extend the interpretation. Debaters should disclose all tags, contention tags, and highlights of evidence on the accept identity arguments on the 2021, 2022 and DCAPF wiki. They extend this argument about how we're reading it to get out of actually debating the arguments about anti-racism. But number one, we say that under our model of debate, you can still read this argument, and we think that it's good that they're reading this argument. They should just read it while it's open source, which tells us the majority of their offense. Because under our model of debate, anti-racist education education still exists, but their model of small schools are uniquely excluded. They've conceded the Zhao evidence on our second standard about exclusion. The Zhao evidence says that when you allow open source disclosure over their disclosure, which is full text, which is first 3 words and last 3 words, it allows novices to check other big schools prep and learn what excellent prep is and allow them to start their own programs in the first place. They've conceded that this is a prior question to the debate because of inclusion. If people aren't included in the first place, they can't access the benefits of the game in the first place. You should vote negative to endorse our model of debate, which is good because our model, because they've conceded that you should vote on the potential for abuse. All of the reasonability stuff is new. They've conceded that you should prefer competing interpretations because reasonability collapses to competing interpretations anyway, and the bright line's arbitrary and encourages judge intervention. That was in prior speeches. Don't vote off the new reasonability stuff. That means that a risk of offense on the shell wins us the round. They don't read a counter attack. We have a risk of offense.
Good round.
Good round, guys.
Is everyone here? Can someone say something?
I think everyone's here.
Yeah, everyone's here.
Yeah, I'm back
Sorry,
now.
I just want to make sure I gave up on my headphones. Anyone want to disclose or not disclose? Announce.
I don't mind, or if the judge who scrolled wants to go first, they can go for it.
Okay. C'est pas moi. It is not me.
It's not me, but
Yeah, sorry, it's cutting in and out for me. I think it's me.
yes.
Okay. So it was a 2-1 decision for the neg. I was the AF vote. I guess I can disclose real quick why I voted AF. So I'll be honest, I don't have like experience with theory or stuff like that. I come from like a really small school. And so I basically had to go with what I could understand. I'm pretty pro disclosure, but I did vote AF because I bought their argument that the con set like an arbitrary bright line for disclosure, and that at that point it's more important to prioritize anti-racist discourse. I would have voted con if they hadn't like disclosed on the wiki, but it seemed like they disclosed sufficiently, and so I didn't see a risk of abuse.
Sure, I can go next. So I really did not want to vote neg, but in the end, I think that from a solely tech over truth level, they are slightly ahead in this round. So all the arguments about reasonability and gut checking are new in Final Focus. So even though I think they're probably true, I can't really evaluate them. And you also read a counter interp earlier, so that does make it more tough for me to buy all of these like, come on, this is ridiculous type arguments. And since the counter interp is ultimately dropped, the neg has full access to the shell. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. People are just being dumb in my background. But at that point, I have to weigh the discourse from the K against the inclusion impacts from the neg. So the issue is that all of the AF's arguments on weighing between these two issues are dependent on the neg's argument being like frivolous and unnecessary. But if they aren't winning these reasonability claims and they're conceding the entire shell essentially, like at that point, the only substantive weighing I get left in the round is that novices will be kicked out of the event and never access the discourse and, you know, just any benefits of debate, like such as the AF case without OS, which is like a really ridiculous claim in my opinion, but it is unanswered. So I end up voting neg there. I don't vote on the IVI either. Like I was kind of compelled to because I think the neg really undercovered it in their summary. But overall, I think that the response they give is sufficient enough that these arguments the AF is reading are still able to be read, but they're just read much better in a world in which teams OS. And they're also identifying that they read OS on a lot of teams, so they're not just like shunning these specific arguments. And I also think the IVI kind of relies on the shell being something that is a cop-out, but by winning arguments like inclusion, they are proving that the shell is like important for novices and stuff. So like I didn't want to vote neg, but I did.
For me, I had no problem voting neg. It was pretty clear technically on a theoretical level. There was a double bind to either inclusivity being true, in which I think open source is very reasonable, especially in a world where I know that both teams read disclosure theory. I think that open source is a reasonable thing. And that is like the judge intervention that the neg talks about, I guess. But I mean, the double bind is that it's either reasonability, in which case I come from LD and open source is the very basic norm. That's the floor in LD. I think that because everyone does it. Then the other side of that double bind is like competing interps, in which case there isn't a competing interp extended into the final focus, which means that it's a default neg ballot. I mean, after that, I still, if I had to go like going further than that, I still buy that it's a gateway issue. This is conceded throughout the summary and final focus, and it's a question of inclusivity. Do I think that this could have been worded in a more damning and offensive way? Yes. In policy and LD, you'll see a lot more epistemic claims about how we can't engage with issues if they're not disclosed and we can't read the literature behind them. A lot of times, really good open source debaters will make it very contextual to the literature base, saying things about how it's paywalled. That would have been a great example. It was in Grand Crossfire. But I still think the narrative is still there. That's just an example to support the narrative that this is fundamentally a gateway issue. I think that after that, insofar as like it's the key internal link to having the discourse that is talked about in the AF, it makes sense to me. But I don't go that far because of the competing interrupts reasonability question, like a paradigmatic issue at the top. I think that the independent voter should have been phrased as an RVI. Like you should have just spent time going for an RVI on this shell instead of trying to make it like an independent voter thing, because then it just turned into like an overview debate, which ultimately lost you the round because you didn't engage with the technical line by line of the theory shell, right? So I think if you made that an RVI, you kind of would have been forced to stay on the shell layer of the debate instead of just making an overview, cross-applying your case. I think, and then you could have said the same stuff, just like make it as offense to back to your counter interp, but also would have forced you to extend your counter interp as well. On the final focus for the affirmative, I think that the none evidence in case definitely wasn't in summary and perhaps not rebuttal as well. And I again was confused by the reasonability shift. I'm gonna say some things now that are assorted. The first thing is that the Academy K definitely should have been a Cap K. The question of allyship is a hard link into capitalism because it foregoes solidarity and a united struggle instead of in place of like, you know, allying with like particularities of oppression. I think that the responses from Maris didn't make sense to me at all. I don't know what this has to do with affect theory. I think that if anything, a really good defense of policymaking as a good strategy would have been your best bet for the rebuttal. Occupied UC Berkeley definitely wasn't successful, but maybe that's because I'm biased. So I wasn't really sure what that was about. Also, Marist, this is a major perf con of the shell. They're saying that the Academy is a failed place for resistance on the discursive layer, but their shell is saying that we should perfect the way that we have discourse within the Academy. That's a major perf con that I would have automatically voted affirmative on. I think that Neg, Chantilly, you really need to be prepped for CX. It was really annoying for you to say over and over that you didn't have questions. That's a really bad person. This definitely would have been a low point win in a prelim. I think that Marist, I ultimately want to know why the differentiation between open source versus disclosure theory is frivolous. I feel like very broadly, you debated this round as if it was a disclosure shell when it was really O-source. I know that your blocks were labeled O-source, but I feel like you can have more engagement with the particularities of this argument. The final thing that I will say is that this is like really particular, but the argument that we don't link to the Zhao evidence because we don't have block texts is silly, because the only reason you don't have block text is you didn't put it into your sites, which means that debaters have to go an extra step to get those sites, which isn't an argument made by Chantilly. I just thought it's like kind of a disingenuous argument to say that we don't link into this thing because we don't even do the bare minimum of what it's talking about. That's everything. I'm happy to answer any light questions that you have. I'm also
if we read cap, what would the alternative be?
I think you can read it as a linear disad, as like a fracturing of movements argument, or you could read an alternative. I'm not really sure of what the meta is in PF right now for critiques and particularly alternatives, but I mean, yeah.
Do you think if we read it as like a disad to their representations and saying like voting negative is a rejection of those representations, that's sufficient? That's a sufficient alternative?
It's sure, but it's less so their representations, more so their political strategy. The idea of being able to talk to Trump supporters and telling them that the war on drugs is bad is not a way to rally the working class. That doesn't work. Like you can't go up to like a Trump rally and be like, oh my God, the war on drugs is bad. Like they'll like probably like punch you, right? Like that's the narrative that you would go for with Cap K, right? It's solidarity as a political method. instead of particular struggles. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. Good round.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. Good round.